The average Ohioan will pay nearly $453,000 in taxes over their lifetime, with $147,000 of that in just property taxes. No wonder Ohio homeowners call this a war and fighting back. Just think about that for a second. $147,000 in just property taxes. That's why so many families feel like they don't really own their homes. They're just renting them from the government. And now homeowners across Ohio are at their wits' end. Property taxes keep rising, wages aren't keeping up, and people across the state are fighting back. One of them is Lizzie Margolis, a local Ohio mom who stepped out of the normal life and into the front lines of the Ohio property tax war. We're fortunate enough to have Lizzie on the Housing Nerd today, and she's going to break down what's happening on the ground level and tell us if we're any closer to winning. All right, good morning, Lizzie. How are you today?
Good. How are you, Jason?
I'm great. Thanks for joining us on the Housing Nerd. And so, look, let's just start off and I think the viewers want to understand a little bit about you, how you got involved in this property tax war and this property tax revolt, and what was the moment that, triggered you to get involved?
Yeah, so I'll just say I'm just the messenger, right? So I am originally from Northeast Ohio. I went to Miami University for undergrad, and then I moved to New York City. I was a corporate retail buyer there for about 7 years. I moved around a bunch after that for my career, my husband's career. We were in Florida, we were in Boston, and then I was pregnant with my son, and I joked around and said, we can't have a child with a Boston accent. And so I really wanted to come back to Ohio and, be near family. And I just love Ohio. I love the Midwest. I think the values are amazing. I think the people are great. I wanted my kids to have the childhood that I had. So we moved back. The closest we could get to family was Columbus, which is a great area. So we moved here in 2015. I stayed at home. I quit my job. I stayed at home. I just started slowly kind of volunteering with different groups. And next thing you know, I was going to the State House and I was meeting with legislators and going over policy. And I'm very passionate about education and then spending. So I met the men who run Axe Ohio Tax just randomly through groups. And we kind of all clicked, and I totally agreed with their philosophy. And I said, well, I'll help you however I can. And that was last year. So here I am now, a volunteer. I'm the Licking County lead for property tax collection for the Petition. And that's kind of where we are today. I also write for the Ohio Register. I'm a citizen journalist, and then I'm a volunteer with the Grassroots Freedom Initiative.
Excellent. And when you just said, I want to clarify this, you lead the effort for petition collection for abolishment of property taxes, right?
Yes, correct.
So we're not paying our taxes to you.
Not Sheriff Nottingham.
That's fine.
I lead the petition collection for Licking County, yes.
Okay, good. So Lizzie, when you look at the property taxes in Ohio, what do you think the biggest issue that Ohioans are facing? What's the biggest issue on how they're handled in the state? Okay,
so I want to say really fast, we were just at the Hartford Fair and we collected which is in Lincoln County, and we collected over 2,000 petitions. And there were a few things that people consistently asked us. So if it's okay with you, I want to kind of go over those things and just kind of explain some of the process really fast, and then we'll go into the next thing. So so Axe Ohio Tax has two principles that they live by, and I think it's really important that we start there. The first principle is that you never truly own your home when you pay property taxes, and that's because you're constantly paying a tax in perpetuity to live in your home. And if you get behind on that tax, they can take your home. So therefore, you're basically renting, right? So that's the first principle. And so there's just this basic notion that home ownership should be outright, that you should never have to pay a tax to live in your home. And then the other principle that they live by is any tax that can leave you homeless is immoral. So that's kind of their motto. That's their moral compass for what they're doing. And then the next thing I kind of want to say is we are all volunteers. So people kind of misunderstand. We are not like other citizen-led ballot initiatives. We are all volunteers. No one's getting paid to do this. We're all doing this because we care about other Ohioans. We care about our communities. And we're seeing things that have been alarming and trends that have become alarming. And then on top of that, I want to say a lot of people at the Hartford Fair would say, well, what's your solution? What's your solution? And I kind of, in a very curt manner, explain to people, I'm not an elected official, right? So you didn't elect me to go to the State House and fix your problems. If you did, I would have already fixed it. No, I'm just kidding. But I'm just a volunteer. And so you pay and elect officials to go to the State House to solve your problems. And guess what? They haven't solved this problem, right? So we've had over 40 pieces of legislation regarding property tax reform that have gone nowhere. So the citizens are stepping up to solve this problem. I'm gonna drop a name. Representative Troy Balderson heard me speak in Licking County, and he then went to Fairfield County, and he had mentioned me to the group, and he said, well, she has no solutions for this. Well, what I want to say to Representative Balderson is that you don't pay me for the solutions. The people that you pay for the solutions, you should take it up with them. So that would be our state reps or our state senators. It's not my job to solve Ohio's problem. That's not what I do for a living. So I just kind of wanted to say that and to let people know that, we've had a lot of people ask, like, well, which party supports this? Like, what people in power support this? Basically, neither party. DeWine came out in a press conference recently and said he doesn't support it. If you ask your state rep, a lot of the state reps and state senators don't support this, regardless of which party they fall in line with. And so that to me was actually reassuring that I'm doing the right thing for Ohioans, because when neither party supports it, I'm like, oh, I think I'm doing the right thing. And a lot of people will say it's going to leave us with chaos and this, that, and the other, but we'll go through some of the solutions that our organization would like to see, but we're ultimately not in charge.
One question for you, because this is something people would probably want to know. Yeah. Why do you think neither side, Troy Balderson, DeWine, I haven't heard JD Vance talk about it at all. You'd think he'd be talking about it because he's from Ohio, right? He's supposed to be an Ohio boy. Bernie Moreno, haven't heard him mention it either, at least not publicly. So why do you think nobody wants it? Nobody wants anything to do with it. What's driving that?
So having gone down to the State House many times, I was going monthly at one point to meet with legislators. If you pull up their campaign finance reports, which is actually really easy to do, you can go on transparency.org. You can see who donates to their campaigns. They take a lot of money from NEA, Ohio Education Association, NEA, National Education Association. And I think it's because they're beholden to lobbyists. They're beholden to big interests, special interests, big unions, labor unions. I think that, and then same with the County Commissioners Association, they've made a stance that they don't support this either. Ultimately, nobody in power wants the money to stop flowing. And that's what's going to happen, right? You're literally daddy's coming home and saying, we're not doing this anymore. We're putting a budget in place, and you guys aren't just going to take the credit card out and spend whatever you want. And that's kind of what this is. And they don't like it, right? So they're kind of having a temper tantrum like a child would. And I think it's because people in power want to stay in power, and the only way to stay in power is through funding. And we're talking big dollars here as far as campaign finance and funding and lobbyists. And every time I would go, it's funny, a side note, every time I would try to meet with a state rep, you go in, they put you in a waiting room in the Reich building. And you walk in and there's all these people that all look the same, right? It's typically males, and they're all dressed the same. And then they all have a lobbyist badge on, and they all get called in before the citizens. And that's a problem. That's a serious problem. And I'm sure that's a problem in every state. I'm sure it's not just us. I tell people all the time, anytime you have one party rule for decades, you're going to have corruption. Competition is good. And we just don't have that in Ohio, regardless of what party affiliation you fall with. So I think, to answer your question, that's why they don't support it, because they've been bought and paid for by people in union and special interests and lobbying groups.
Yeah, I agree. I think that is. And I wonder also if they're just lazy. I mean, just to put a fine point on it, like they're like, look at it like a dirty garage. Like, right. I don't really want to deal with that today. Maybe I'll get to it later.
So I think that politicians, will always see what they can get away with. And so far, Ohioans have not put up a stink. I mean, we've just kind of rolled with it. But now inflation has forced us to kind of say, okay, wait a minute. And I've been saying for the last 3 or 4 years, everybody wants a handout, right? The cities want more money. The schools want more money. The state wants more money. The federal government wants more money. And so once I'm done handing out all my money to all those people, guess what? I need more money. So that's kind of, I mean, we're in this vicious cycle of like, oh, taxpayers are just handing out, and there's becoming less and less for them. And now they're having to make tough decisions and in their home life. And we always say, people always say, well, I have to balance my budget and I have to do this at my house and I can't. Now consumer debt is climbing like dramatically. But I think it's because people are like, well, I can't pay my property taxes and support my family needs. So I'll just put my family needs on a credit card, right? So we're in this terrible cycle. And I think that the elimination of property taxes, I think, is going to show the nation that taxpayers are not going to just keep taking it.
Okay, so folks, this is her presentation. I'll have it linked in the description below, and you guys can go in here afterwards and, look at it. And obviously there's a ton of info in there that'll help educate you on how taxes are collected and what we're spending.
Yeah. So I thought the headlines were obviously the most grabbing. And I think it's really important for people to see these. It's funny. It says the property tax system is breaking in Ohio. Ohio's ground zero. I think that's because of what we're doing with the petition. You had mentioned there's a couple other states. So Michigan tried to do this and they just couldn't get enough signatures. But Texas is in the process of filing with the Texas Supreme Court a lawsuit against property taxes, deeming them unconstitutional. So we're going to wait and see what happens. That's what's Mitch Wexler. He said that they're hopeful that the Texas Supreme Court will hear it, but if not, they're fully prepared to file with the Supreme Court, the federal Supreme Court, which I think I think it's exciting. So we'll see. And I tell people this all the time. It's a domino effect. So whether it happens in Texas, Florida also is working on things through their state legislature because they actually do try to solve things down there. But whether it happens in Florida, Texas, or Ohio, I think it's going to be a domino effect. So once that first state falls, you're going to see all kinds of other states, because not every state, by the way, can do a citizen-led ballot initiative. I think there's only about 18 states that can do that, where they can amend their constitution through the citizens. So those 18 states have that right and they can totally do it. Everyone else will have to file lawsuits or do it through their state legislature, or they'll have to find another way to do it. But I think it will be interesting to see what happens in the next year or so. Yeah, so you and I talked about the salary needed to live comfortably. So NBC did a big survey and it came out that it's $220,000 for a family of four to live comfortably in Ohio, which is crazy. I tell people, 10 years ago, it was like either coasts were really expensive and everything in the middle was affordable. But today that's totally changed. It's not affordable to live anywhere. I mean, you can look in the middle of Missouri and there's like some of the property values are crazy. And then, so I do want to talk about this one headline really fast, the Auditor. So Matt Nolan is his name. He's the president of the County Auditors Association, and he is an auditor, I think, out of Warren County. He just recently made an announcement that if nothing happens, if the state legislature does nothing, if we do nothing, that property taxes are going to go up again about 25 to 30% by the next sexennial. So I know. And I'm like, well, people are not happy now. You're not going to be happy in another 5 years or 4 years, depending on when you got your
so we can expect property taxes. Sorry, that's like startling. So, yeah. So you're saying they're going to go up another 25% from where they are now. That's projected based on the auditor who is warning us about.
Yeah. Yeah. And by the way, like in Licking County, we get our triennial next year. So you've already got another assessment coming to you at the end of next year. I did call the Licking County Auditor's office and I said, well, can you explain the difference between the triennial and the sexennial is like the big kahuna. That's where they assess, all the nuts and bolts. They do everything. And by the way, it's usually third partied out. I found for Licking County, the real estate assessment for the contracts that they give out to these people. So by the way, it's not like your local auditors coming to your house and doing this. Sometimes they do, is if you've pulled a permit or whatever. But they third party all this out, and it's not cheap. These contracts are not cheap either. And that's the other reason I think that they're pushing so hard against this, is because if you think about everyone who's involved in the collection of your property tax, if you eliminate that, you're eliminating all those jobs and all that spending. Now, I'm okay with that, but the government doesn't like to be eliminated. So it's not an easy process. So the Licking County Auditor office told me that the triennial, which is coming out at the end of next year, maybe 10 or 15% increase. That's not usually as significant as the sexennial. But, essentially, like they'll dance around the fact that they'll say, oh, we do audits like every 6 years and then every third year. But basically it comes down to like, they're doing an audit every 3 years in Ohio. I think that's part of the problem. Like other states do audits every 6 to 7 years. They're not doing this triennial, sexennial bounce back and forth, in which case, either way, it doesn't matter. Your property taxes are going up every 3 years, basically. And I was reading yesterday that even during the 2008 to 2012 housing crisis, you didn't always see your property taxes go down. So, and that's looming, by the way. I was just reading an article that they're forecasting a huge market correction in the next 10 years because of all the boomers. Because they've stayed in their homes for decades. But they're going to get to a point where they're either moving in with their kids, they're moving into assisted living, they're passing away, various scenarios. And you're going to see a huge amount of homes flood onto the market, which might cause a drop in home values. But that doesn't necessarily mean your property taxes are going down either, which I don't know how that can be okay. Because if your property value goes up, your property taxes go up. But if your property value goes down, your property taxes don't necessarily go down. So that's another issue. And there's a lot of loopholes with tax code. And I mean, we all know this, right? Corporations get loopholes, wealthy people get loopholes. Like, we need to close all the loopholes. That's really the issue. The problem is, I don't think we have legislature strong enough to do that because their interests lie elsewhere.
One thing that I still struggle to understand, I mean, I understand the details of it, but it's inherently very frustrating that even if we don't vote on any new money spent for our local schools, it's a foregone conclusion, basically, that the property taxes are going to go up. And so one has to wonder, like, well, where's that extra money going? And so, if your school is, in other words, if a school comes to me, because in Granville, what they're doing, because you live in Johnstown, very close by, and you know this, they're building 2 new subdivisions for Granville schools. And the superintendent of the school Jeff Brown already said, hey, we're going to have to probably build a new school. We're going to need to expand the existing school. If more people come in and they need more buildings, to me, I'm like, I understand that part somewhat. I do get that. But if that isn't occurring in every school district across Licking County, why would you need more money just because my value of my home went up? And then to your point, if the value of the home goes down, and I did research on this and couldn't find really, I found examples in the United States where property taxes went down, but then they immediately went up because the schools did an emergency funding levy or something, because they were like, we're addicted to this money. We can't live without it.
So we'll talk about some school facts. So public school enrollment's actually down, so about 10%, so 200,000 students across Ohio. Interestingly, what that means is that the cost per student is going up, right? Because the amount that the schools are getting has not gone down. Now federally, it might, because the federal government sends the states based on enrollment, right? But as far as our state spending and our local spending, it's gone up. So, and you can see this below was a statement from the Ohio Auditors, the state of Ohio Auditors website, where he says public school spending has steadily increased, outpacing inflation and nearly doubling in 20 years. This increase is largely due to higher spending on salaries and benefits. Enrollment in public school has declined, right? So now we're spending, I think it's about $18,000 a student with the decline. I tell people all the time, I'm like, that's like, I went to college for less than that. That's crazy. But on top of that, are you getting an $18,000 education? I mean, proficiency standards, you can see, are down. I mean, they're not holding kids back, by the way. We're not failing kids. Like, in the 1950s, it was like Bobby didn't pass, so Bobby's going to have to stay behind. That doesn't happen anymore, okay? So you can see 4th graders, only 43% of them are proficient in math, 32% in reading, okay? That's less than half, right? So let's do the inverse. 68% of them are not able to read at a 4th grade level. but they're going to keep going on. And so you see proficiency dropping because as the subject matter gets harder, they weren't prepared in 4th grade. So now they're really not prepared in 8th grade. And so by 8th grade, proficiency standards are down in the 30s. So you're looking at like high 60s, low 70% of students are not really in passing. And yet the schools want more money and they're getting more money per student. So like to your point, where's the money going? In a bulk of the money that you, and here's why people don't understand. It's really important that you know where your public school funding is going because 85% of your property taxes go to your schools. So if you're not happy with your property taxes and you're not happy with your schools, you got to tie it all together, right? So you're giving your school a large chunk of money and then they're not performing. There is no competition in public schools. We know this, right? And in Ohio, there was a judge who recently struck down ed choice, and it will go to the Ohio Supreme Court. But there's a huge debate on ed choice because, and I had a couple come to me at the Harvard Fair and say, we don't support that our dollars go to Christian schools. Well, it's not just your dollars, right? It's everybody's dollars. My dollars go to public schools, and I don't support that. So we're all in this bucket where we don't support where our dollars go. In theory, the backpack bill is really the best option, which is you keep your money, that 85% that you pay to the schools goes to you and you decide what to do with it, right? That's true competition. That's true capitalism. That's true like, hey, I give the schools $8,000 a year in property taxes and I want my kids to go to public school. Great. Good for you. I give $8,000 a year and I don't want my kids to go to public school. Good for you. We want what's best for every family. And the only way to do that is to have true ed choice, which we don't really have. If you want to go to the next slide. Yeah. So this is some headlines, which some of them actually made me laugh. The Columbus superintendent makes more than the governor. That made me laugh. But it's like crazy. But what I've learned is the superintendent salaries are extremely high. Some people say that's good. Some people say that's bad. I just think, so in Johnstown Monroe, our superintendent makes $180,000 a year. That's just his base salary. So what we don't know, and this is where there's no real transparency, we don't know their total package. And what I mean by that is we don't know, some of these superintendents get mileage reimbursement. They get bonuses. Some of these superintendents, the school pays in their full pension pay-in. We don't know what their total compensation is. And as taxpayers, we should know. So I think, when I've talked to a lot of teachers, by the way, teachers are not stealing the money, right? They're not in their income. They're not the ones that are breaking the bank. I know in Johnstown, like our teachers make, I don't know, $45,000 to $50,000 a year. But then once you get to vice principal and above, or once you're administrative, you're making six figures. And again, I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but every community is different. And what every community can afford is also different. The school board, by the way, is the one that determines their packages. Okay. So, so what I've learned is with principals, vice principals, superintendents, they all do this double dipping. So they will retire. And I've talked to so many people who know this happened in their school district. It happened in mine. They will retire. And then a week later, they'll go back to work for their same job. And then what happens is they then get to collect their pension and get paid their paycheck.
You're saying, so this goes on.
Yes, this goes on. Yeah. So if you go to my next slide, yeah. So, and that was in 2010, right? So who knows what it is today? So about 30% of our 600, I think now we've got like 630 school districts. It's a little higher. 630, 613 superintendents were collecting a pension and a paycheck. Listen, it's a loophole. It's not illegal. What they're doing is not illegal. I think it's immoral because it's taking taxpayer funds. And by the way, it's also taking funds from kids, right? It's taking funds from materials, curriculum, students, education. And so it's not illegal, but it is a loophole and we need to close it. Somebody in 2019 introduced a piece of legislation where they would close the loophole for double dipping, and it didn't pass. And again, why didn't it pass? Because when your campaign is financed by school unions and OEA and whoever else, you're not going to pass it. And so rather than do what's right, they do what is comfortable and what gets them reelected. And so, but under Kasich, they passed successfully, which I was shocked. And they passed restrictive bargaining rights. And it basically, for public employees, which by the way, there's 600 and something thousand public employees in Ohio. Half of them are schools. So what the restrictive bargaining right bill said was that you had to be fully transparent with your spending, including pension fund pay-in, and then your sick leave, and so you could not fleece the taxpayers without their knowledge, basically. What was really interesting to me is that it was overturned in a ballot initiative the following year by Ohioans. We voted on it and we rescinded it. And so I don't understand that. I didn't live in Ohio at this time. I don't understand why we did that. The only thing that would make sense to me is the unions got to everybody, right? And by the way, they're going to do this with the ballot and with our initiative. I tell people all the time, look for it on the ballot. You need to vote for it. Do not buy into the fear mongering, because they're going to say, oh, your house is going to burn down and the fire department's not going to come and your school's like little Bobby won't have anywhere to go to school. That's not going to happen. The government always finds a way to fund something. They've never not found a way to fund, right? I'm sure by next year, the state legislature may have a solution because they will have no choice but to have a solution. But the fear mongering is probably what, and then, we have a lot of uninformed voters. I don't mean that disparagingly, but we do not have high voting rates in Ohio in general, especially in the primaries. But, people need to be educated. And what I'm guessing is the language, right? This is the other thing. Whoever wrote the language for the ballot probably said, it's going to restrict the rights of all the public employees. And that wasn't really what it was. It was forcing them to be more transparent to taxpayers. So below that, you can see double dipping of pension funds costs us $1 billion annually. That's a lot of money. So again, you're asking where's our property tax money going? Well, that's one example, right?
They collected about 20. I've heard 22, I've heard 24 billion annually last year in property taxes in Ohio. So that's 1 billion of it. It's not a small amount. And so the double dipping part obviously is insane. As far as the superintendent salaries go, if their performance that we had reviewed earlier of students was good,
right,
then you deserve the money for performance. Like a company CEO, I have no problem paying a CEO billions of dollars a year and making them the most wealthy person on the planet if they drive a ton of value to their organization.
Right.
But if they're not driving value, then no, that's crazy. And I don't know how much exactly the Columbus City School Superintendent goes or earns, but I don't think their scores are very good. On here, it stands out. On average, each school district in Ohio has 3 administrators making $100,000 or more. Ohio spends 49, I'm reading this right, I hope, 49% more on admin cost in the schools than the national average.
Yeah. So we are really top heavy and we spend way too much money on people who aren't actually in the classroom educating our children. And that frustrates me for students. That's, I'm not going to say those people aren't giving value, but that's not why you send your kid to school. It's not so that you could have administrators. And then, if you read the one below that, so we rank 47th in the nation on spending for instruction. We're one of the last states to spend money on instruction. That means teachers and everything that goes into a classroom, right? Teachers should not have to pay for pencils and crayons and whatever else out of their pocket. No. And then we're 9th in the nation for administration. So we are so top heavy with administration. I remember we lived in Olentangy School District and they wanted to pass a levy and somebody was very smart and they published the union contract on a website. And I read through it. And it was to add, I think it was 10 or 100. No, it was 10 new administrators for $1 million. Basically, it broke down to a very even $100,000 for all these administrators. And I'm like, to do what? And if you go into, a lot of the schools now too are taking the old schools and turning them into administrative buildings. That's a problem. The fact that an entire building is dedicated to administrators. I've been in those buildings. They push paper all day. They're not educating kids. They're not contributing to your child's education. They're not getting your child into college scholarships or teaching them trades or, getting them ready for life. So like, I have an axe to grind. If I'm going to die on any hill, it's probably going to be this hill. And it makes me really unpopular, right? So, but listen, you have to face facts.
I have been, I received pushback from people that I know personally who are like, they catch my videos and go, so you don't support teachers. I'm like, no.
That's not it at all.
The teachers are the ones that are suffering for this because they're scraping by trying to buy pencils for their classroom when the superintendent's making 180. So it's like, hey, maybe we ought to not have as many administrators and put that money towards the actual teachers, right?
Right. I think the issue is this. The teachers feel loyal to their system. Okay, fine.
Sure.
Fine. But the teachers need to face reality. And the reality is you're not getting paid at the same rate as everyone above you. Right now, some people argue, well, they have to have a master's degree and they have to have this and they have to do that and yada, yada, yada. The reality is they're not contributing. People in administration are not contributing in any way towards education other than to run the process, right? The paperwork, the shuffling, the red tape, the process. That's another thing. We need to get rid of regulations. So we're the sixth most regulated state in the United States. Regulations cost billions of dollars to Ohioans. So I don't know the number. I would be interested to know in property taxes, how much of that goes to regulation. But what teachers need to understand is I'm fighting for them to get more money, even though I want to eliminate my property tax, right? Because eliminating property tax is just step one. And then after that, it's closing loopholes is step two. And then step three is reevaluating the needs of your community. So this isn't going to just end, like, we're not just going to shut the lights off, let's end property taxes, and then we'll call it a day. That's not, to me, this is a multi-step process that we all are going to have to be involved in. And personnel funds eats up most of your education budget. There's also school debt, which we need to get into, which is the bond debt. So on top of all the levies that you have and your property taxes and everything combined with that, you also then have bond debt. So when schools want to do major infrastructure, but you talked about this with Granville, build a new school, usually they can't do it all through levies. So they take out debt, like a mortgage, but a school can't take out a mortgage, so they take on bond debt. And so, and we just did this, by the way, the state of Ohio passed issue 2 against my warnings in the fall. It got voted through for $2.5 billion worth of bond debt. What people need to understand is in Ohio, we are deeply in debt as a state. Like if we had to pay everything forth by next year, we would file bankruptcy. That's just the reality. But between the unfunded pensions, which is like $420 million, that's just OPERS, by the way. I didn't get into the STRS. I didn't get into all the other pension funds. I just researched OPERS and read through all that. It's $420 million unfunded liabilities. And then we've got...
Lizzie, can you explain real quick, what's OPERS? What did you call it?
OPERS is Ohio Pension Retirement System. So employee pension retirement system. So
this is a pension for teachers and administrators?
So OPERS includes like police, firemen, state employees, local employees, things like that. And then there's the state teacher retirement system. And then there's another one that's for like the bus drivers. They have a different retirement system. The bus drivers, the aides, people who are like part-time at the school who qualify for a pension, or who have like a secondary job at the school who qualify for a pension. So there's all these pension funds too, but we are unfunded, and those Ohio will tout like, yeah, but we're 80% funded. And we're like, yeah, but that 20% is really big. So it's not like your 20% is $20,000. Your 20% is $420 million. So, and then we have bonds, right? So we just passed issue 2 in November, which was a $2.5 billion bond issuance that we just all voted for because apparently we're not done spending in Ohio. And so that money has to get taken from somewhere. They'll say like, well, we'll take it from sales tax or we'll take it from here or whatever. But that means you're taking it away from that, whatever it's funding now, right? I don't know what that is, but we can give $600 million to the Haslams for a Brown Stadium, which by the way, they're billionaires. So why are we giving billionaires money? It's like, so, and that's another loophole, is that we're giving all these tax breaks to corporations and billionaires and millionaires. And we're saying, but we need them for business and we need them for this. No, we don't. We can incentivize them in other ways. We can lower the corporate tax rate. We can lower the sales tax rate. We can lower the, income tax. We can have a graduated income tax. Like there's so many, which we do, by the way, but there's so many other avenues that we can do to bring people to our state, right? And like one is to not have an income tax, right? But this is Johnstown Monroe School District. So we have $63 million in bonds outstanding. So this is, the voters have voted on this, right? So we voted to take out, not all at once, but over time, this is how many bonds outstanding we have for our school district. So, and it shows you your population. We've got 19,000 people. So that means when I do the math, $3,500 per person, we're on the hook to pay that back. Okay. Now, when I do the math and divide it by the number of kids in my school district, right? Because a 2-year-old's not in the school district and a 75-year-old's not in the school district, that number goes to like 43,000 a student.
And it's important for folks to know that Johnstown is population 19,000. So that's 63 million in outstanding bond debt. I mean, it sounds big, but in relation to probably big school systems in Ohio, it's nothing.
It's not.
You only have 19,000. You only have 19,000 people. And by the way, folks, Johnstown is ground zero for the Intel project. I mean, it's like it's basically in Johnstown. I mean, you're within 2 minutes of the job site if you're in downtown Johnstown. So there's there's a whole bunch of risk there. And my point is, it's a small community.
It's a small community. And actually the city of Johnstown is only 5,000 people, right? But the school district is bigger. So it's because you have kids in outside of the actual city limits who go to our school. So, but the school district and the city of Johnstown is only 5,000 people, right? So we are a really small town and we've taken on an enormous amount of debt. I sat in a meeting with the president of the school board who said we are encouraged to take on debt because it makes our bond rating higher. So then we can take on more debt. That's a problem because could you imagine if we all lived by that philosophy? Like, well, let's take on more debt. I mean, it kind of does work that way, by the way, with our credit ratings. So if you open up a credit card for $10,000, let's say you open up 2 credit cards for $10,000, you've got $20,000 limit. If you closed one of them, it would actually negatively affect your credit score. So the credit system is set up to make you indebted, right? They want you paying off a credit card and then they tell you it's better for your credit score, right? So if you never had a credit card at all, your credit score would actually be a lot lower. So we're like rewarding people for going into debt. We're not rewarding people for being financially responsible. I mean, the whole system is just messed up. But so this is just Johnstown. And I know that if you watch that Mick Vexler video in Denton, he talks a lot about Denton County, Texas. I think that's his school district. They're like hundreds of millions of dollars into school bond debt. So, to your point, this is a small school district. I don't know what some of the other school districts in Ohio are at. It's not hard to find it. You just type in your school district and type in school bond debt. And and listen, that all has to get paid back, right? So the taxpayers are on the hook for this. We're on the hook for issue 2. We're on the hook for property taxes. We're on the hook for income taxes. So we're kind of being taxed to death, right? So we need to, again, close loopholes and be a little more restrained. People ask me, so we can talk about the solutions, right? I had a lot of people at the Hartford Fair say to me, well, what's your solution? And what's your solution? And again, I always tell them, like, you don't pay me for solutions. I was not voted by you. If I was president for a day, this is what I would do. I will say this much. Of the money that they're going to lose if we eliminate the property tax, I don't think you need to replace it all, right? You need to close loopholes. You need to figure out, I tell people this, wants versus needs. Pads for every student is not a need. We all did it with paper and pens, the old school way. And students learn better that way too, by the way. Studies show that. There is something about writing physically that is better for the brain. So we don't need all new playgrounds every 10 years, right? I mean, how many of us went and I played on a rickety old playground and I joke around, I probably had tetanus. Like, you know, like my kids, even now, we're up at my dad's and the playground hasn't been updated in 30 years. They love it. It's like, I mean, it's a hazard, right? They love it. So I think we have to talk about like wants versus needs. You know, what does the city need? How many taxes do we already collect for that one item? So for example, the Ohio Lottery Commission was created in the 70s because it was going to help with school taxes and yada, yada, yada. But 28 cents of every dollar goes to education. The rest of it goes to administrative costs and payouts. But, you know, how much of it goes to administrative costs, right? So we have an Ohio tax for the lottery. We have income tax that goes to schools, and we have property taxes that go to schools. So we have three ways to fund the schools, and yet it's never enough. Same with roads and bridges. I mean, that was another thing. People said, how are we going to repair our roads and bridges? We have a million taxes that cover roads and bridges. We have the gas tax. We've got your income tax. We've got now this issue to bond infrastructure that's going to go towards roads and bridges. If you live in a city, you have a city tax that goes towards roads and bridges. So there's a million ways in which they collect taxes. They double or triple collect the same tax or a different tax on the same item. So I think we need to start to kind of peel back the layers of like, what does my community actually need to function?
So something to this point, I did a little research on how would we replace the revenue. I'll go back to Mitch Vexler, and he's tag teamed with a guy on YouTube, Travis Spencer, Real Estate Mindset, and he's like on the front lines of property tax abolishment. But they are adamant that just abolishing property tax isn't enough. You must have a plan to replace it. Without that, it's almost like, they almost call it, in a way, they're kind of like DeWine, where they're saying, well, it's kind of useless, right? Without that, that's what their thought is. Now, when I looked at sales tax increases, what I didn't know was that Ohio right now, the law limits sales tax to like 8.5%, and we're close to that already. Yeah. So like and I think Mitch Vexler had said that in Texas that when he did a national calculation, I think he said, because I just listened to it again today in preparation for this, 15%. We'd have to pay 15% sales tax, 15% for a couple years. Then it would normalize at 11 to 12 or 13%,
right, for
sales tax. But it sounds like every state, including Ohio, we would have to change the law in Ohio in order to increase that gate. So there are other ways, though. Like I even thought, I wonder if you could charge a tax when you buy a house or sell a house. I'm not sure that would work very well. And I don't know that it would fund enough. You got income tax, like you said, but you can also cut spending. Like with the Brown Stadium in Cleveland, you mentioned that. Are we all paying tax in Ohio for that?
Yeah, or is it just Cleveland? I talked to a state rep and was like, can you explain how this will work? And basically, the budget didn't increase, is my understanding. Basically, they're going to take tax revenue from somewhere else and give it to the Brown Stadium. And in return, they're assuming they're going to get X number of sales tax revenue from the new stadium. You know, when people go to the games and they do this and they do that and whatever. And so they're thinking, in theory, they're going to make it up plus some, right? But I've heard arguments made like, there's only 10 home games. How much can you make in 10 home games, right? I have an issue with the public funding anything that's private, because then all of a sudden, look, then the Bengals came out and they were like, well, where's our money, right? And so it's like, well, it's like how you run your own household. What I do for one child, I have to do for all, right?
What their argument is for the Brown Stadium is really the same argument that I would think we would have for property taxes being replaced by not even increase in sales tax, in the sales tax rate. Because if you wiped away property tax and you're a business and you're like, I could set up shop in Ohio, or I could, if I'm a citizen, I could move to Ohio, because as you showed in one of your charts, we're losing population. Yeah. And so if you increase population by incentivizing people with no property tax, even if theoretically, just like the Brown Stadium argument, even if you didn't increase the property or the sales tax rate, you would increase sales tax receipts, because more people would be spending more money in the state and more businesses would be set up here. Correct. Unless I'm wrong and missing that, it's the same argument. And we don't need a dome to play football in Ohio. That's sacrilegious if you're a football fan in Ohio. And the product on the field is horrible. So first they need to focus on winning a game. Then they can focus on a new stadium, and a dome makes it like not even football.
Yeah, no, I'm originally from outside of Akron. So yeah, no, Cleveland fans they like to be in the cold, right? The idea is if you got rid of property taxes, you could essentially drive people who are leaving Ohio, by the way, in droves. We've lost about 100,000, I think 150,000 Ohioans in the last 10 years. We are depopulating, by the way. In 68 of the 88 counties, we're depopulating. And I've driven through a lot of those counties. And they are riddled with crime and drugs. We have one of the highest overdose deaths in the nation per capita. And so the only counties that are growing are the ones outside of Columbus. There's a couple up in the Northwest, and then there's a couple outside of Cincinnati. But everyone's coming to Columbus, basically, which is driving the housing market higher too, because that's supply and demand. And then the people who are coming to Columbus tend to be more affluent, right? So it's driving up the cost of living. So while the rest of Ohio is dying off, and it's really sad, you drive through some of these counties and there's no industry, there are no jobs, people have nothing to support them in their life. And so, but I pulled the numbers, and you can go on. There's a website called Opportunity Ohio, and it's run by a guy named Matt Mayer, and it's basically a think tank that's just focused on pulling numbers on Ohio. But so we've lost about 120,000 people, but the revenue that we've lost from those people is almost $16 billion. It's like $15.5 billion in lost revenue. So as we continue to lose people to the state, the burden of those who stay is going to grow. In other words, the state government, and by the way, it's the same thing as the schools. So we're losing people, but our state budget is growing. So our state budget went up 7% to last year, but we're losing people. So the amount that each taxpayer owes is going to become greater and greater and greater and greater. And so, this is our per capita income chart. So you can see where we are as a percent to US average, we're constantly declining. So as other states have grown in their median income or per capita income, we have actually declined. So we aren't keeping pace, and nationally we rank 37th. For per capita income. And so,
but we're seventh in property taxes, or eighth, the highest property tax rate.
So our tax structure is really high. So I think we have, I can't remember the exact number, we're like ninth highest overall for tax burden. So that's all the taxes you pay when you live in Ohio. That's your income tax, that's your gas tax, your sales tax, whatever. Yeah. So we're ninth highest in the nation for overall tax burden, but we're 37th for median income or per capita income. So what I tell people is you live in New York, your property taxes are high, but your median income is high too. So, now upstate New York isn't like Manhattan, it's totally different. But, same with California, like some of these states, your taxes are higher, but your median income is higher. So it ends up being more proportionate, right? We're very disproportionate. So we have very high tax rates, but we have very low income. So, and based on the recent unemployment numbers, we're now the fourth highest in unemployment. And I've looked at foreclosure numbers. Our foreclosure numbers are growing. So when you have people in the state house who are very dismissive of these numbers, they are the ones who have created this problem. Right? Back to population is we rank 43rd in the nation for population growth rate. So meaning there's 42 other states that are growing at a faster rate than we are. And so again, to your point, if we could attract people, because how many of your viewers or how many people, just like people move to states with no income tax, people would totally move here for no property tax. And I've talked to people from other states who have said, oh my gosh, that would be amazing, because they would take the income tax, right? Because perhaps they already live in a state with an income tax. So it would be apples to apples, but they would save significantly on the property tax. And so basically we would be like the inverse of Texas or Florida. They have really high property tax rates similar to Ohio, but they have no income tax. Right? So we would be the opposite. We would have an income tax, but we would have no property tax. So, because listen, you can't get rid of all taxes. I get that. I would like to personally, but there's no way around that. So I think, my solutions are this. We have to stop voting for bond debt. It's not going to do us any favors, especially when those bonds come up and they're due. They're usually 30-year bonds. When they're due, and by the way, people have told me, well, we can get them at 0% interest. It's still debt. You still have to pay it back, right? So we have to stop spending. And I think a lot of Ohioans, I've door knocked on a lot of doors. People do not correlate levies to property taxes, which blows my mind. But they don't understand that when they vote yes on a levy, that they're going to then see an increase in their property taxes. And they'll say to me, well, it's a renewal. And I'm like, okay, but so you're agreeing to renew to spend the money that you're already spending. Do you want to spend that? And to your point, a lot of people say, but what about the schools? What about the schools? The schools need competition, in all honesty, and the schools need to do a better job of educating our children, because I don't think that they are earning their income at this point as a whole, as a system as a whole. So to me, you mentioned Mitch Wexler income tax. So, okay, or the sales tax. Ohio Revised Code, the highest that we can go with the sales tax is 8.25. The highest city right now in Ohio that is at the 8.25 is Pataskala, Ohio, which blows my mind. It's not the city of Columbus or Cincinnati or Dayton So Pataskala is at the 8.25. By the way, the voters voted for that. So again, we just haven't had enough. I don't understand. So with the sales tax, people don't understand either. Sales tax is split between state sales tax and city sales tax. Combined, they can't be above 8.25. I think the state sales tax is like 5.5 or 5.75, and then the city can vote for the remainder. So like Pataskala, they voted as a city to raise that difference between 8.25 and 5.5, right? To go all the way up to 8.25. To your point, I think it's like over 50 cities in Ohio just this year alone have increased their sales tax. We have a lot of cities that are already at the 8%. And I always give Tennessee as an example. They have no income tax. Their sales tax is 10%, and their property taxes are their effective rate. So that's about like what they spend on average per 100,000 is half of what we have. So we on average in Ohio are 1.3 to 1.4% per 100,000 valuation. Tennessee's 0.7. Listen, other states are doing it. They're paying their school system, right? They have no income tax, and they have a relatively modest sales tax compared to, it's not really any different. 2% is not really that different from Ohio. So how do they do it and we can't seem to do it? I think it's corruption. I think it's loopholes. I think it's giving corporations abatements and all these other things, but sticking it to the taxpayers. I think they just have a stronger government. I think that they have less spending, and these are all the things that we all need to admit it. And I think that's the hard part. But Mitch Wexler said 15%. The reason why it's 15% for the sales tax is to pay off the bond debt. So he said, in order for us to pay off the amortized bond debt in the school districts, we would need to go to 15% sales tax for a few years to pay off the debt. And then we could lower the sales tax to about 10 to 11%. Do you remember when Greece, you're about my age, like Greece had the austerity measures, and it was around 2013, and people were throwing a fit in Greece because they were basically bankrupt and nobody wanted to give up their pensions and their this and their that and all the fun stuff. But like Greece was, they were poor. And we're kind of at that point now in Ohio where we are going to have some serious austerity measures where it's going to be like, sorry, you cannot have your cake and eat it too anymore. We can't give you double dipping in pension funds. Those days are long gone. We're not giving you $180,000 to run a school district where the kids can't read and write and do math. We need to start. We, as taxpayers and citizens of Ohio, need to start pushing back, and we need to start saying, no, I'm not going to do that for you. You need to earn it. So I think if I were president of Ohio, governor, we would, and by the way, sales tax gets voted on, right? So every community can do what's best for them. Property taxes don't get voted on. And I explain to people this. If you don't like what your home's been valued at, good luck fighting it. You're going to have to hire an appraiser. You're going to have to pay like $500 or $700. You're going to have to take the day off of work, go down to your county auditor's office, fight with them, and they maybe shave off $15,000 off of your value. It's like $100 a month, right? Maybe 50. But with a lot of other taxes, you can vote on it. So if it's a flat fee, for example, like in Johnstown, we pay a school tax on top of all the other taxes. And it's a 1% school tax based on your income. So, communities have that option. You abolish property taxes, and then you say, well, the school needs funded. Okay, great. Vote for it on the ballot. There's nothing saying you as a community can't raise funds. And I had a lot of township trustees say, well, the only way we can collect funds is through property tax. So if you eliminate property tax, what are townships going to do? Vote for funds. There's nothing that says you can't do it. Now, the codes may need to be revised. To your point, Ohio Revised Code is going to need to be revised. But you can revise codes. There's we can send people to the moon. We can revise codes. It's not hard. So it's just somebody's got to do it, right? And people, to your point, are kind of lazy and they want the easy way out and they want it given to them. But sales tax, I think, should be about 10%. If we're following Tennessee, it should be 10%. Whether or not income tax has to go up or down, I think the state needs to rein in their spending and keep income tax where it is. I don't think as of right now you'll ever be able to eliminate income tax in Ohio because we're losing too many people. But if we eliminate property tax and all of a sudden businesses want to come here, small businesses want to come here, young families want to come here, and we start booming, you might be able to eliminate the income tax and eliminate the property tax. So there's no right or wrong answer. I tell people there's a million ways to get revenue and there's a million ways to skin the cat. It's just like, what do you want to see? What most people don't want to see is they don't want to give up spending. And that's the harsh reality.
Right. Yeah, I agree. It comes from that. And I think it also comes from the fact they don't want to admit that the people they've elected aren't managing the money right. And they're afraid of the backlash that, if we get rid of property tax, it means we don't care about the firefighters or the school. I tell people locally in Granville, and we have amazing schools in Granville, taxes are high, but I'm like, you know what? My kid, honestly, he gets a pretty good education. So personally, for me, the money they're spending, it's like they keep the town in great condition. If there's a tree down on the street, they come out running out and take care of it. So if they're taking care of the community and they're taking care of people, I have no problem paying more tax. I have no problem funding that. Right. I just don't want the value or the tax tied to the value of an unrealized gain. Mm-hmm. And I ask people all the time who argue with me, I say, well, if you have a 401k, if you have Bitcoin, if you have an Edward Jones account or an investment account, and you haven't realized any gain off of that, like you haven't sold anything, you just have it in there for retirement, nobody's knocking on your door every year and saying, well, you owe me because Bitcoin went up 200% over the last 2 years. You owe me, Jason, another $5,000. And I'm like, well, I haven't realized the gain. And they're like, that doesn't matter. And so that's the hurdle, right? Like, and I think people, because of the crazy increase in home values, people are now starting to realize, this is now a big problem. So let's talk about, we talked about solutions, which are, I think you're onto the right track with a flat tax, sales tax that makes sense like Tennessee. When it comes to the abolishment of property taxes in Ohio, can you go into that, Lizzie, as far as the effort, the status, how people can get involved, how they should sign the petition, just the details on that? So
the ballot amendment language in the initiative is, there was a group that got together, Lobbyists for Citizens out of Lake County. They kind of created a different branch called Axe Ohio Tax, and they worked together with Citizens for Property Reform. And basically the ballot language states that we would like to abolish all property taxes on all real properties. So that includes residential, commercial, agricultural, land, outbuildings, and improvements therein of, or whatever the fancy ballot language is. So meaning, like, if you add a barn to your property, they can't increase your property taxes. And the ballot language also prohibits any future property taxes from being enacted. So it protects you going forward. The ballot language does not have a date on it. It's effective the first day of the following year. The reason why it doesn't have a date on it is, so there was an amendment Fair Wage Amendment they tried to collect signatures for last year. And a lot of these ballot initiatives will say effective January 1st of 2025 or 2026 or whatever it is. If you don't collect the number of signatures that you need by your cutoff point for that date, you have to rewrite the ballot language and then you have to get all new signatures. So ours just says effective the first day of the following year. So that gives us time to collect as many as we need. So that's kind of the ballot language. And then we have over 1,000 volunteers across the state in all 88 counties collecting. Some counties have leads like myself who are trying to organize events and be out there and collecting signatures. Other counties are like smaller, they're a lot more rural. It might be more grassroots where they just door knock or meet at the, the local watering hole So as far as how the process works. Okay, we had a lot of people ask us this at the Hartford Fair. Let's say you're from Monroe County and you come to Licking County. We can take your signature. You can sign at any location. It just has to be on the Monroe County petition. So what works is you put your name and address. We don't need your driver's license. I joke around. I'm like, we don't need your blood work. Or your firstborn child. We just need your address, your signature, the date. Very simple. And the reason being is because all of that gets collected and then all of that eventually makes its way to the Secretary of State's office to be validated. Well, it goes to the Secretary of State's office. Then they send it out. If you're Monroe County, doesn't matter that you signed in Licking County, they send Monroe County Board of Elections all the petitions from Monroe County. So all 88 Board of Elections will get all the petitions eventually. And then what they do is they verify you. They verify that that's actually you. You live in that on the address you say you live in. You're a registered voter, blah, 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 blah. So that's kind of how it works. That's why, people always ask us like, well, where does this information go and what happens to it? Am I going to get on a list? People ask me all the time. I'm like, I'm sure I'm already on a list. It's okay. You can just join me. It's very simple. Your information is secure. We're not selling it to anybody. It's not going anywhere outside of our organization. And then, so all petitions have to be filed 90 days prior to the election. We are collecting a large number of petitions on a daily basis. We're not ready to release the number yet, but we will soon. And we said it will be as like a ticker on the top of our website, and we'll update it weekly or bi-weekly. And then you'll need to look for it on the ballot. It will be on the ballot sometime next year. And yeah, that's kind of the process.
By signing the petition, you're not saying, I want to abolish property tax. You're just saying, I want it on the ballot.
Yes, correct.
Right? Like for the Ohioans to decide.
Yeah. And we've had people say like, well, I'm kind of on the fence. I think it should be on the ballot, but I have to do more homework. And they've signed, and we say, if you decide you don't support it, you don't have to vote for it, right? We're just simply asking for it to be on the ballot and then let the voters decide.
Yeah, I mean, according to the poll I ran on my website or on the YouTube channel, it was about 68%, 78%. I should have it up, but I don't. Like 68%, I think, of people voted and said they would vote to abolish property tax in Ohio. And I get a lot of comments, like probably 10, 15 comments a day from old videos when they watch them and say, yeah, I live in wherever, Montana, Michigan, where, and I would vote for this too in my state. So it seems like the support's there, and the thought is that it goes on the ballot, then Ohioans have the chance to vote. If it gets passed on the ballot, then it would be the following year, right?
Correct. So regardless of whether or not it's on the May ballot next year or the November ballot next year, it will not be effective until January 1st of 2027.
Okay. So legislators then have a year to figure it out.
Correct. And we've said that,
right?
because we had people say, but then all of a sudden funding gets cut in the middle of the year. And you're like, well, the legislators have a year to figure it out. And I think the biggest frustration from our organization is that we've tried to work with the legislators, by the way. Everybody has been open. I've talked to my state rep. And I want people to understand something. I went screaming and shouting to my state rep in 2022. I'm hearing all this stuff about property taxes being crazy, like what's going to happen. And he said, well, we're going to form a committee. They love to form committees. By the way, DeWine's forming a committee right now to figure out what to do about property taxes. And everybody on that committee is a government worker. So it's not like he's getting, Nancy from Geauga or Joe from Delaware to come and talk. He's not getting private, small business owners to come and bring solutions. He's got his posse and he's created a committee. Guess what? They're going to come up with whatever solutions DeWine wants to see, right? So it's not real. It's a shadow committee. We can actually make this very simple. We could just do a flat tax and eliminate all other taxes, right? We could just have a sales tax. By the way, consumption tax, sales tax is the most transparent tax, and the reason and the fairest tax because it hits everybody, right? Homeowners, not homeowners, 17-year-olds, 65-year-olds. It doesn't matter. Everybody has a consumption tax. Everybody pays in. Right now, there are a lot of people who don't pay any taxes, right? So think about all the revenue that would come in when all of a sudden your entire population of people who can hold a dollar bill can have to pay a tax. But so the state legislature formed a committee a couple of years ago, and literally nothing came out of it. And I remember my state rep saying to me, "Don't get your hopes up," right? And that's disappointing because you're like, we send you people, we elect you and we send you because this is going to be a real problem for Ohioans. And I could see the writing on the wall. And he was like, yeah, just don't get your hopes up because there's probably not going to be any good solutions. And so far of the legislation that's been introduced, it's all nibbling. It's a little bit of an expansion on the Homestead Act, a little bit of a reduction here, a little bit of a reduction there. Some of it was capping how much schools can raise. But, a lot of that got struck out, by the way, under DeWine when he got the general budget, and then they tried to veto it. And I don't know if they were successful or not. I haven't been keeping up, but that was the end of July. They were going to override some of his line items that he struck through. The ultimate issue is this. They're going to form all these committees and nothing's going to come out of it because that's just government, by the way. There's not a whole lot they can do about that. Nobody agrees on anything. And I think it's great that Ohioans have finally grabbed the bull by the horns and said, it's okay that you don't want to do your job. So we're going to do it for you. And you may not like the way that we do it, right? But it's going to get done. And I think it's actually going to be a good thing because I tell people this. I get a lot of guys that sign and they're like, oh, my wife's already decided what she's going to spend the money on, right? And they make jokes. And I'm like, think about this, right? All of a sudden you've got $5,000 in your pocket that you didn't have before. What are you going to spend it on? Maybe you invest it. Maybe you put it towards college. Maybe you decide, no, this is the year we're going to put our kids in a private school and we have the Ed Choice voucher and we can make additional funds towards it. Maybe this is the year you take a family vacation or buy that new HVAC unit you needed that you couldn't afford to do before because you were paying too much in property taxes. So, and I explain that to people too. When my dad's like, have you noticed how homes in Ohio are really going downhill? They don't look as nice. People aren't putting as much care into them. And I'm like, that's because all their money is going to mortgage and property taxes. So we're all house poor, right? And we can't, and you mentioned home values going up. I was for a long time, I couldn't figure out why now all of a sudden Ohioans are upset about property taxes. But I think it's because, and I explained this at a presentation, we've always had very low cost of living in Ohio, for the most part. We've always had very affordable homes. My parents bought their house for $75,000 in 1982, okay? Even when interest rates were really high. But we've always had really affordable homes. So 1.4% on 100,000 is nothing, right? But all of a sudden, so a little bit on a little bit is a little bit, but a little bit on a lot is a lot. So 1.4% on a $700,000 house, you're talking some serious dough. So I think that's why people are finally okay, this is not sustainable anymore.
Yeah, so I wanted to bring this up. This is to your point, Lizzie. I did this poll on my channel. Is Ohio an affordable place to live? And so 53% said yes, but 47% said no. And so there's people that understand that Ohio is no longer an affordable place to live. So Ohio is not an affordable place to live, according to 47% of the people that voted on my channel. And then I did this one, which was, would you vote yes to replace property taxes with a higher income or sales tax? And 68% said yes. And we received 578 votes. So people are pretty passionate about that. And one of the concerns that people do have, I will say, and as a realtor and investor in real estate, I can tell you it's probably something that is very plausible in just because of the free market works, is that if property taxes are eliminated, you could see home values and home prices actually go up from it, because people buy on payment. That's how that's how consumers buy, even though if they shouldn't, they still do. That's why buy now, pay later and student loans are out of control. But if you don't, all of a sudden you don't have to make that $500, $600 tax payment every month, you automatically are going to qualify for a higher loan. And that is something that could happen. But on the flip side of that too is if their payment then is going towards the actual paying down the loan and going towards the house rather than an unrecoverable expense like the property taxes that Ohioans are paying $175,000 in their lifetime on now, like that will probably be maybe better than property taxes, even if home values go up. And as a landlord, if I, to your point earlier about where you would spend the money, instead of me shelling out 15 grand every 6 months on property taxes for my properties, I would love to improve the property and or reduce the rent.
Yeah.
So
or
people,
both,
it's more affordable and it's nicer.
Right. Well, and I think that it's really important. The housing market is really hard to predict. I'm sure you know this. I could see obviously supply and demand, right? You've lowered the price, so you're going to get more demand. But I could also see more home builders building, right? Because then people are able to buy land, right, and build new houses, and the land property tax is not there. I think too, you might actually see people moving within Ohio, because right now, like, most people can't afford to buy the house that they currently live in if they've lived in there for 5+ years, right? So they know that. So they're kind of stagnant, right? But there might be people who are like, we want to go live near our grandchildren, and they live up in Cleveland and we live in Cincinnati, but we can't afford right now up in Cleveland, right? I actually think you'd see a lot of shuffling within Ohio of people who are like, we wanted to move further out, but now we've missed the boat and we can't afford it, and this, that, and the other. Or we've always dreamed of living in German Village and we want to be able to walk everywhere and we couldn't afford it, and now we can. I think you'll obviously see a lot of people coming to Ohio. So to your point, I think it could put a strain on home prices, but my hope would be that builders would all of a sudden be like, this is great. This is a good problem to have.
I think the elimination of property tax will definitely help the younger home buyers. There's no doubt.
Yeah. And, I hope it will help expand who can buy into a home. Property, like, I kind of have to explain this to people. Private property homeownership is the cornerstone of America. There's a lot of countries where people don't own homes, and specifically private property. This idea that we have rights to private property is fundamentally American, and we have to protect that, because it's like, well, if it's homes today, it's something else tomorrow. Because and we've had people come in and say, like, when we've done signature collection, like, well, I just don't care if somebody can't afford the property taxes, which I think is so unempathetic. But I say, well, it's them today, but it could be you tomorrow, right? So if property taxes go up another 30%. Or is that going to then be your problem, right? And at what point do we say, like, we should stop the bleeding? Are you going to wait till you want to put a Band-Aid on a bullet hole? I mean, or do you want to try to compress it now? So, the Ohio housing market's really interesting, but I know my girlfriend in Tennessee, they left Ohio a few years ago. They sold their house for way too much money. Even in 2022 or 2021, they sold it for like $300 and something a square foot down in Upper Arlington. And it was a 1-bathroom, right? It was a 1932 Cape 1-bathroom. And I was thinking to myself, who in their right mind would pay that? I could only imagine what it's worth today. But the problem in Tennessee is, like, to your point, there's nothing. I mean, she hasn't really been able to get into anything that she can afford. So, And it's not because of property taxes. It's because Tennessee is growing so fast and people are going there because the taxes are so low that it's driving the home values up, and then they don't have the supply to provide to people. It's like I always tell people, like, if I had $1 million, like, what would I do? I would build like affordable communities for people. And I don't mean affordable government communities, right? Like quality homes that are, you know, like what they used to be at a normal price for people. And so I don't know. I think that the property tax elimination will be more beneficial than it is detrimental. And it's so funny because I'm always a glass half empty kind of person, but I see this as just so much opportunity for people to be able to stay in their homes, to update their homes, to not be penalized. By the way, I added on a screened-in porch, and the first thing they did was send the auditor out. And I was so annoyed about it because you're penalizing me for making my house look nicer. My neighbors like that I make my house look nicer because it makes their values better, right? It's better for everybody when we all take care of our homes, but we're now penalizing people for that. It's terrible. Like, and back to private property rights. That's my home. Like, you shouldn't be able to come into my home and tell me how much it's worth because I added a screened-in porch. Like, I can't even sleep on it, right? I mean, it's Ohio. Like, how many months out of the year can I actually use it? And I had asked someone because that somebody had signed and they said, well, I added a porch, and they came out and assessed. And I said, well, how much did it cost you? And she said $75 more a month. Like, and I'm thinking, like, in 2 years, in taxes, I will have paid off my screened-in porch. Like, that's crazy. You know what I mean? So Mitch Wexler explains this, but, you know, and we kind of talked about this, but like there's third parties that come in and they assess your home value, but they determine, you know, they pull comps. That happens. But like where I live, Intel's messing with everything, right? So Intel's buying, they had bought up some properties, right? So, and they offered way over fair market value for them, which one would make the argument that they should because they're forcing people out, right? Essentially. They're not, but they are. And so, but what that did was like, okay, a 2,500 square foot house went for $2 million, right? And then so when all of a sudden they come and they're pulling comps, but are they really pulling like true comps? Or are they including that $2 million, 2,500 square foot house in my property, in my comps? Do you know what I mean? And so, and like, how do they determine if you make any sort of adjustment? So let's say you finish your basement and you pull permits. Well, they know. So as soon as you pull a permit through the county auditor office, within a year, they send somebody out to audit. I had a girlfriend who said they actually were looking through her windows because they wanted to see how many rooms she had in her. She had just built a house and they hadn't yet moved in, and they were on the property trying to assess how many rooms were in the home. It's like, these people, like, at what point do you realize, like, this is my home? This isn't just something that is for you to assess. It's my property. It's my home. And so, and there's no like, so Mitch Wexler talks about uniform USPAPs, like uniform standard appraisal methods, right? In which they're supposed to take, the land value that they assess your land to be worth, and it's generally a 5-to-1 ratio. So your home value is 5 times your land value, and that's your total property value. We are way more than that 5-to-1 ratio. I mean, if you guys go on your county auditor site and you look up your land value and then you type and then you look at what your home is assessed at, it's way more than that 5-to-1 ratio. And so they've gotten away from these uniform standard practices, and they've kind of just arbitrarily picked numbers. And what he found was in Texas, they arbitrarily picked numbers because they needed to, right? They have somebody from the county auditor's office who was given a deposition that said that they manipulated the numbers to reach a certain financial budget goal. There is the possibility for corruption within appraisal practice methods. And the fact that we hire out a third party to do those methods allows for more corruption.
Yeah, agreed. So, I mean, and I don't know if you saw some of the most recent videos that Travis did on Real Estate Mindset, but he actually got assaulted. He went to the protest meeting to, protest his property tax value, and had all this evidence laid out, and they didn't like what he was presenting because he called them out, and they kind of basically asked him to leave. He wasn't even really done with understanding the value and how he really got into the details of how they assessed that property, Lizzie, and they couldn't really explain it to where it made sense. And so as he was leaving, he had a camera with him the whole time. He had a camera the entire meeting, and he was as he was leaving, he's like, okay, I'm leaving. And he's walking down the hallway and he got assaulted. So kudos to him. One of the things I see in Ohio that's different than Texas is that the assessed values on our homes, or the actual values, the top line value, not the final tax value, are lower,
right,
much lower than the actual market price. There isn't a property I've looked at where if I go to the auditor site, that value is higher than what I could sell the property for. In Texas, it's the opposite.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm fearful, and Ohioans need to be really concerned about this, that if the county auditors, and they're not dumb, if they went out and actually assessed the properties for the real market value, it would be bad. It would be a lot higher.
I know for my assessed value, it came in at a certain amount, and it was way lower than market value. I won't say it was about 100,000 lower than 100 to 150,000 lower than market value, than what I know I could sell it for. So to your point, you're like, oh shoot, there's still wiggle room. And I knew I couldn't argue it for that reason. But I also know, like, my neighbor across the street, theirs was more than what their assessed value was, or about what it was. So they did argue it, and they got about 15,000 off. So to your point, like, they have wiggle room to go up. And I think some of that's intentional. Like, they know they have wiggle room to go up. You know, it's kind of like when you get the raise and you're like, it's not that much. And they're like, well, we want to leave room so that we can keep giving you, a higher raise, before your next promotion. And you're like, oh, okay, that seems to make sense. And then you don't really get that or whatever. But, I think that they're leaving that wiggle room, because if the market keeps going up, they can keep going up, right? I know what you're talking about in debt. Like the vlogger, what was his name, Trent?
Travis, yeah.
Travis. So I know that he specifically showed an example where the house sold for less than the appraisal value. I don't think we have that issue. I think during 21, 22, we were running into that issue. I know I had friends who it went over asking price and it started going over the appraisal value, and then you have to pay the difference, right? But I think because housing prices keep going up in Columbus specifically, now even those homes are probably higher than what their appraisals were a few years ago. So I do think, to your point, it's kind of scary because they have more room to go up, and I think that they will do it if they can. And, I asked the state rep, I said, where's all the money going? And he was like, well, your cost of living has gone up about 30% with inflation, but so has the cost for government. And I'm like, and at the time I was like, okay, that's a fair enough answer, I guess, And then I was like, wait a minute, what do you mean the cost of government has gone up 30%? Like, so what I think is too is that the government's trying to keep pace with inflation, because pension funds have to keep pace with inflation. Like, there are certain guarantees that have to keep pace with inflation. So that's probably too why you're seeing that increase. I know that in Johnstown, they've said like city contracts to like road repairs and all that have gone up through the roof. One of the things that I've suggested to people, and I know it's very radical, but I think it's actually could be, if we utilized it, could be great. Right now, when the government does bids for contracts, they usually give it to a buddy, right? They give it to their favorite guy. And their favorite guy may not be the cheapest guy, right? Or they do go with the lowest bidder, and then you get a crap product, right? So, but I have explained to people, like, if your fire department, let's say, I pay $1,200 a year, by the way, in taxes for my fire department. Yeah, it's a lot. If your fire department is really expensive, but let's say they're in one township, and let's say the township next door, that fire department's like, hey, we can cover your town for a fraction of that contract. Why wouldn't we do it? Right? Like, if we can get government services, if we can actually contract out government services as private citizens, right? And I've talked about this with police forces too. Like, if we can contract out privately as private citizens with police forces, fire and EMS, whatever, and say, as a community, this is what we're going to pay you. Take it or leave it. And you can make contracts that way, I think it would be phenomenal. I've talked to a few township trustees all across Ohio who have said, well, we used to have volunteer firefighters. I'm like, well, okay, let's bring volunteer firefighters back. Like, why not? Right? And they said, well, they got pushed out. Right? So you're like, okay, well, that's a cost to taxpayers. So I think there's a lot of ways in which you can be really clever and creative to suit your community's needs, because not every community is affluent, and we need to be mindful of that. And totally switching topics really fast. I watched this video about what's going on in Toledo with the homes up there. Like something like 30% of home sales are going to private equity firms or private entities, and they're not maintaining the homes. And nobody's even living in the homes. They've just bought them and they're sitting there. And I guess the Toledo housing market is like one of the largest housing markets for private equity firms to be buying into. And so I do think that is harming home ownership more than anything else, is this whole private equity firm, private entities, foreign entities coming in and buying up our homes. Like that's another thing the state legislature needs to address. It is preventing private firms or foreign firms from coming in and buying farmland, buying private, residential, whatever it is. And other states have passed legislature like that. We have legislation like that. We haven't done that.
Yeah, I think so. You're correct. In the Toledo housing market, the prices just continue to climb. That's probably one of the reasons why. In Cleveland, it's 27% of all homes are purchased right now by investors. In Columbus, it's like 19%. Nationwide, it's around 19%. The weird thing is small investors are the ones buying all the properties. Like they control, like the mom and pop investors, as called, people that own less than 10 homes are like something to the nature of 90% of the investor market in the US. But there are states, like I talked to a lady in Montana recently where there's an area of town where they're going to lower property taxes significantly for everybody except non-primary residents. And so that, then like an Airbnb owner or a rental owner, corporation, or just a mom and pop would have to pay more in property tax than the average person, on their primary home. So that could be a way to kind of regulate some of that.
That sounds like a great idea.
Yeah, it could be. I don't know that it'll ever pass where they will limit the number of homes somebody can buy. But to your point, look, and being an investor myself, it's like I get where people are coming from. Like if a private equity company comes into a city, buys up a whole block and never does anything with the properties, that's like completely detrimental to the community. At the same time, you've got small investors that are probably doing the same thing, but then hopefully a lot of the investors, the people I know and like myself, we go into an area and say, well, there's a house there that's been forgotten about. Let me go ahead and buy it. And I'm going to buy it at a cheap price, obviously. I'm then going to sink six figures into it to get it habitable and get a rental property for somebody that's safe and clean and affordable. And those, or even on a flip where you're like, that house was forgotten about. Now we turned it around and now somebody can actually buy it. But that's a big quagmire. It's scary though too. And I know a lot of people are scared about that because if you have, it's a small portion of the market that's actually owned by investors, but the share of current buyers is large. And so eventually that's going to be lopsided. It's going to be, it'll be a lot more investors out there buying homes and owning homes than the average person. And it's very sad. It is. Even as an investor, I know it can be a slippery slope. So there are bad actors out there that, buy houses and don't do anything with them. Why they don't, I don't know. That's crazy.
Well, and I saw in Delaware County, like just north of Powell on 23, if you take 23 up off of, not Cheshire, it's somewhere over there. They have now a community of homes, but they're like nice homes, but they're homes for rent. And
build to rent. Build to rent, I did a video on my channel about build to rent. And a lot of the big investors have migrated to, instead of buying single family homes scattered throughout an area where it's kind of hard to manage, you got to go here, go there. They're saying, all right, well, let's just build a community that's only for rent. And in a way, to me, it's like, well, that's better than buying a bunch of single family homes in a neighborhood. At least that community's controlled and it's just, that's just rental. You don't have to worry about, taking a home from somebody that would normally have it.
So why are there people building to rent rather than just building homes to sell?
Right. So the companies that are building them to rent, a lot of them got started in this after the GFC, when the great financial crisis, when the real estate values crashed. And this is insane, but the government, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, gave insane, basically zero interest loans to big hedge funds, big private equity, to come in and buy thousands and thousands of single family houses. Before that, Wall Street really wasn't involved in the housing market, but they went in and said, all right, here, we're going to give you these crazy loans to come in and buy all these assets. The private equity came in and said, wow, this is a great investment. Like we can make cash flow on it every month. And then we sell these funds, right, to investors into 401ks or whatever, they never left that. They were like, well, this is a great idea. So they kept buying homes. But then as home values went up and interest rates went up and property taxes went up, just like the average person out there, they were like, this doesn't make sense anymore. So they were like, let's just go ahead and build communities where we can still get this cash flow and this return. So it's a steady return. And renting a property out, if you own a rental property, the income you get from that is taxed much differently than if you sell a property. Because you're crushed on a capital gain if you sell a property. But if you get rental income, it's classified differently in the IRS code. And that's a huge loophole. So I'm one of those loophole guys, I guess.
I mean, listen.
Does that make sense? Does my explanation make sense?
Yeah, no, it totally makes sense. I think, there's always going to be a need to service for rent, right? Especially Ohio. I mean, we have so many universities here and young kids. And, we're losing young people, but for the, we are Columbus is a college town. So I always think there's going to be a need to rent, especially people in their, early 20s, mid 20s, and people are buying homes later, right? Because of costs and everything. But it makes me a little disheartened that it feels like rentals are outpacing new home builds or home sales or, and the people who can now get into a home, it's like harder and harder. For most people, it's not to rent for life. It's to rent for a period of time. And I think that's kind of changed. I think there are a lot of people that they are going to have to rent for life and then you never own. And then you do the math of how much you pay in rent over, 10, 20 years of living there. You could have owned a home. Right?
Yeah, you're correct in many cases. I am seeing more, especially in the younger generations. The comments I get from my channel are like almost like I don't even want to own a home. Right. Like I'm good renting because what's the point of even trying to buy a home? I did speak to, when I did this video over in Dublin, I ran into a couple residents and I didn't put them on camera, but I asked them like, why did you move here? Like, what was your story? Both of them had one lived in Dublin, one lived in German Village or the Short North, both elderly folks. And they said, my spouse passed away. I was in a house that I couldn't take care of. I wanted something that was easy and still felt like a home. So this is perfect. She's like, because I don't pay property taxes. I mean, I do at the end of the day, right? But not off the top, right? I'm not paying insurance. I'm not taking care of the place. I don't have to worry about it, but it still feels like a home with a yard. And so that made sense, from a lifestyle standpoint. But as a landlord, if the government would incentivize me to rehab older properties, I don't think we'd have a housing shortage. So in Mount Vernon, I got a grant from the city of Mount Vernon to improve a property I own there. They gave me a third of the money in a zero interest loan, and then I had to come up with a third of the money. And I ended up spending $15,000 on my property because of that grant. So it's like, if they would incentivize me, I could provide another affordable unit for somebody to rent that's not $3,000, $1,000 a month. And it's very reasonable. So that's, anyway, we're off topic, but I agree. I mean, it's a quagmire of problems when it comes to big equity buying homes. It is. Even as an investor, I can admit that.
Yeah. Well, I'll just say this and then we can wrap up. Yeah, I was just going to say, if I think, even for the people who don't necessarily support ending of property taxes, I think it's really important that they start to kind of open their eyes to what they're spending on their local communities and how much it's costing them and then what they're getting in return too, right? So I like that our Johnstown wanted to double our city tax, right? And I flat out looked at the guy who came to my door and I said, why? If you can explain to me why, and I think most people who are volunteering with this organization, like we're very understanding of the fact that you can't get a service for nothing, right? I'm not asking to have my kids in the school district and not pay the schools, right? That's not what we're talking about. But I think it's understanding why they need the money, where the money's going, and what's going to happen when it's unsustainable that we can't keep paying these increases because the median income in Ohio isn't keeping pace. And what do we do to prevent people from losing their homes? And so if there's nothing else that comes out of this, the legislature needs to answer the question of what are you going to do to prevent people from losing their homes? And that is what we are all about. We don't want people to lose their homes. And it's not anecdotal either, by the way. People are foreclosure rates are going up. People are leaving their homes, and maybe they're just moving out of Ohio and they're going other places, right? Where there's, more opportunity for them. But we need to solve for people not losing their homes. And that's why this organization was created, was because we have, as a state, we are an aging state, meaning so people 17 to 35 are fleeing Ohio, and Ohio is either really young or really old. So we don't have that like worker base to feed into our tax funds, right? And then on top of that, we're depopulating. But so how do we prevent all of the people on fixed income in our state from losing their homes? And I think that this is a great organization. The men who have started and women who have started this group are phenomenal people, and they really care about, we really want to hear the stories. We want to hear about what Ohioans are going through. We want to try to solve, and we want to help. Do we have all the answers? We don't. We're just people. Like I said, you don't pay us for all the solutions. But we want people to get involved too, by the way. If you go to axohtax.com, axohiotax.com, you can sign up. You can just print off the petition. I would watch the video on how to sign it. You need to know what you're doing. But we want people to get involved. We want feedback. We want comments. We've had so many amazing conversations with people. I've learned so much from people we've so far collected from 35 out of 88 counties. So I've met people all over Ohio, which is phenomenal. And I think it's great. And for the people who don't support this cause, I think that they need to do their homework. They need to kind of look at the stats. I'll send you all the source notes and links and the website or my presentation, and they need to come up with a solution, right? I've been putting it back on people. What's my solution? Okay, well, what's your solution? To do nothing. Nothing is not going to cut it. So nothing will further decline Ohio's population, by the way, because, we aren't really growing jobs in Ohio either. We have Jobs Ohio, it's done nothing. Our unemployment's going up. So I think that, for the people who don't support the movement, that's fine, but then find something that you do support that helps your community, that doesn't increase spending. That would be my challenge to them. And if people have questions, go to axohiotax.com, send an email, send your stories. They've been posting things on their social media. We have a challenge coming up. We want everyone to try to get 100 signatures. We are going to have a semi-truck caravan on September 20th. We've got about 100 cars already registered. So that's on the website too. We're going to basically loop around 270, and then we're going to have signing stations all around 270 on September 20th. So if you go on our website or if you go on our Facebook page, there's tons of information about it. We're going to try to do Delaware City Friday nights. They do basically not a farmer's market, but a city kind of market to start collecting for Delaware County. And yeah, we're going to be everywhere. So just look on our website, check the Facebook page. We've got social medias up and running. They've totally revamped and rebranded. So for anybody who's interested, we would love to have you help us.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm going to link all this stuff in the description of this video. I like disruptors in markets. I like disruptors in communities. When people get off their rear and throw a wrench into the system that is clearly broken and is causing financial hardship for folks that have done nothing wrong, I like that. And so Lizzie, you can tell from this interview and this conversation that she's definitely a disruptor. You can see the passion that she brings to the table. And then you've got Beth and you've got Brian that I've already talked to, and they're all disruptors, I guess, which is really cool. I love it. I think that what you said it best is that they've had a long time to fix this thing and they haven't, so you're going to fix it for them. And the argument that you have to bring a solution to the table, I agree with you, Lizzie, that that's not your job. And it's in a way almost more poignant to say, look, we're going to make this change. You're going to have to figure it out now.
Yeah.
And the citizens have spoke up, and we're not in charge of the state, so we may not have the solution to replace it, but you're going to have to figure it out and actually do your job. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, because, by the way, I think if you added in the solution to the amendment and the change, it would be much harder to get through.
I agree. And everybody has their own opinion too on how it should be solved. And like I said, we're not the experts, right? We're not forming committees and meeting with people across the state to solve this. And because I've gotten a lot of feedback from lots of people, to your point, I think it would be much harder to pass through because some people don't like the sales tax, some people don't like the income tax, And I want to explain one thing really fast. The reason we didn't offer a solution in the language is because my understanding, this is what I've been told, the wordier your ballot amendment is, the more signatures you have to collect and the more pages you have. And so it just kind of got into being like a logistical nightmare, not to mention, to your point, even as a committee, we don't all agree, right? So,
right.
We have ideas, but there might be somebody in the state house who has an amazing idea. Or you mentioned, taxing out-of-state residents. Like, that's great. I've never heard that. I had heard things like a one-time sales tax on new homes and things like that. There's so many creative ways to generate funding that I don't think we'll have a shortage of ideas. It's just what's feasible, what's fair, ideally what can be voted on so that we're in control of the process. But thank you. I was collecting signatures in my neighborhood, and I have the sweetest older man as a neighbor. And I was like, hey, do you want to sign? He was really nice. And he said, aren't you a stick of dynamite? And I laughed so hard, and I came home and I told my husband, I've never been called a stick of dynamite, and I really liked it.
I love it.
And so I like to think of our organization as being a stick of dynamite. And, it is. Disruptors are a good thing. And, there have been amazing disruptors throughout history. And I always tell people the revolution was a huge disruption. And you look at what it gave us. And so we shouldn't be afraid of that, because sometimes out of a great disruption comes the most amazing things and the most amazing freedoms. Right. So I think if we just keep our eye on that, then, and have hope that we can do this, it'll all be good. So awesome, Lizzie. Well, this is a great conversation. I really appreciate it. I'm gonna link everything below, and you guys reach out to me. I'm sure Lizzie's info will be in there. You can reach out to her, Brian and Beth. Obviously, I'll put their information in. They're in charge of a lot of this effort to abolish property taxes in Ohio, and then find a petition location, find a way to get involved, and go out there and do it if you're in Ohio. And we'll hopefully have this on the ballot, and it'll be interesting to see how it turns out, but it'll be the voters to decide, which is the way it should be, right? Yeah. Awesome. Thank you for having me. You're welcome, Lizzie. Thank you for joining me.